What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Unscripted, a show that brings you professionals from all walks of life, touching on their backstory, their mindset, and how they navigate through adversity and opposition, while providing you practical tips that might help you on your path. I'm your host, two-time Olympian, Olympic bronze medalist, author, and motivational speaker, Hakeem Haynes. Now, let's get into the episode. This week on the show, she's an executive coach for startups, founder and host of Millennial Life School. Sharon Kilon Han joins me on the show. In 2020, 2021, Sharon was recognized as one of the top 4% life coaches on Thumbtack. She's someone who is passionate about helping ambitious millennials find clarity in their vision, helping them gain self-awareness and take actions on their dreams. She works with a global community of startup founders and people in various stages of life and career, helping them to think deeper, explore solutions, and live a joyful, purpose-driven life. Sharon has a heart and desire to help people, but it wasn't until she hit a quarter-life crisis that really made her think about what exactly she wanted to do and what it would look like. And that's when she quit her corporate job and decided to make a decision that would impact her for the years to come. In this episode, we get into reflections on the life of her grandfather, early life in Seoul, South Korea, moving to America and what she learned in her early years of getting there, how she dealt with her self-imposed expectations, graduating at the top of her classes, why she felt it was time to leave her corporate job, her personal development journey, finding purpose in helping others, and the purpose behind Millennial Life School, and so much more. Sometimes we feel stuck at times, wondering how did we get here or what do we do next? Sharon has been there. In this episode, she walks us through how she finds purpose in the midst of navigating through life's uncertainty. So before we get into the episode, if you've been following the show over the years and you've been enjoying the episodes, I ask that you do me a favor and leave a rating and review of the podcast, wherever you can leave podcast ratings and review. This small act goes a long way in moving the podcast forward and will be greatly, greatly appreciated. Also, over the years, I've been getting a lot of different questions and people asking to sit down for coffee for certain different things and certain different topics. So I have virtually created something that would allow us to do so. It's called Virtual Coffee. This is all about having a conversation on whatever you feel like you need to discuss. Maybe you need someone to listen. Maybe you need some advice, whatever the case may be. Perhaps you just want to sit down and talk about life. Well, I have provided an option of how we can do that. And you can find that on my website, which I will leave in the description below. So if that's something that you are into and would like to have a discussion on life, maybe it's advice, whatever the case may be, the topic is on you, then perhaps and we can find a way to do so. So with all that being said, enjoy this week's episode with Sharon Kilon Han.
Hello.
Sharon.
Hi.
How you doing?
I'm good. Akeem, nice to see you.
I'm looking forward to our conversation today, Sharon. But I first have to say, very sorry to hear about your grandfather. I understand that one. I lost one of my grandmothers January this year. And when you lose people, it kind of puts like things into a perspective from a mortality standpoint. But I'm curious, Sharon, what did your grandfather mean to you? Like, what type of man was he?
Well, I actually haven't talked to anyone about this. It just happened 2 days ago. So it's still pretty fresh. I just saw him on Sunday, like the day before with my sister. I'm really glad we went because, we didn't know when he was going to pass, but we knew that, his health was on a sharp decline. Well, first of all, this one kind of
Absolutely. Take your time.
Yes. I was really sad about this because he's actually was my last grandparent.
Yeah.
Well, my dad's side grandfather actually he passed away when my mom was pregnant with me. And then my mom's side grandparents passed away when I was 7, or no, not 7, a little bit shortly after I came to America.
Yeah.
So the grandfather that just passed away, he's actually my great uncle. So he's the younger brother of my mom's dad.
Yeah.
But he's kind of like, it was always my only figure of grandfather. But he's the one, he gave my name Sharon.
Wow.
So yeah, so when I came to America when I was 7 years old, I was trying to pick out different names. And then my sister and I was 7, my sister was 9. And one of our favorite American movies that we were watching when we first came was this movie called Annie. I don't know if you know.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
They made a remake of that not too long ago.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, I mean, we didn't know a lot about English names. So we saw that and we were trying to like fight over the name Annie. But my sister was like, I'm going to be Annie, so you be Jenny. So at first I was like, okay, I'll be Jenny, you be Annie. And then we went to a church and then we're like, hi, we're Annie and Jenny. And then everyone just started laughing and we didn't really understand why. To this day, I don't know really why. But after that, we're like, okay, we're not keeping this name. We got to think of a different name. And I had no idea. And so I was over at my grandpa's house and he was like, oh, you should be Sharon. It's his favorite hymn, Jesus Rose of Sharon. He had just recently like sang that song as like a solo song at church before. But he used to always sing that. He loved that. And so he gave me my name Sharon. And he's the one who actually told me the stories of my great grandfather when I was young. I had no idea who my great grandfather was, but he was really passionate about letting us know about our family history and about our faith history. So my great grandfather, he was one of the first groups of people from Korea to go to Hawaii back in the days when they're doing like sugar plantation stuff. So my great grandfather went to Hawaii when he was young, maybe like 19 years old or something like that, to work at the sugarcane farms. And then he was actually arrested because there was like a revolt that happened with the Korean sugar plantation workers and the owners, because they weren't treating them fairly. They weren't giving them the promised wages and things like that. And my great grandfather, because he was young and he was one of those Korean people who picked up English for the pretty fast. So he was there kind of translating for the people who were revolting and who were protesting. And so they thought my great grandfather was a leader. Wow. So they put him in jail. And actually, it was there in jail that he met Jesus through someone who came to preach the gospel in prison. And he had different like supernatural experiences, encounters in dreams and such. And he was sent back to Korea as a missionary. And he actually helped start multiple different churches in Korea, and he founded an orphanage that is still running in the family today. So he's so amazing, so faithful, so God honoring, and he would always say like, "Oh yeah, I wake up every day, exercise, read the Bible, sing some hymn songs, and praise God." And that's how he always started his day. And I'm just grateful to have gotten to make a lot of memories with him, take him out to his favorite meals, have these conversations, learn about my family history. And I just hope that I can continue to carry this family legacy of loving God and loving others well, because, I saw how he exemplified that.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing just that, Sharon. I think it's one of those things where like, I lost my grandfather when I was like 14, and that really affected me because apart from my father, that was the first man that I saw loved me genuinely, right? And one of the things with loss is we often stop talking about who we lost. But life is a celebration, and to be able to talk about them and to share it, that's how we keep it alive, right? So even though it's still fresh, thank you for sharing that. He had seeds of obviously faith, but perseverance, which trickled down to you.
Mhm.
But we're gonna go back a little bit to how
Mhm.
I usually start the show, because something that you said about your grandfather,
Mhm.
he wakes up and does a couple things every single day to get himself
Mhm.
in the right mood, in the right state of mind. So Sharon, give me three things that you are grateful for today.
Well, one, I'm really grateful to be talking with you, Akeem, and to have this opportunity to be on the podcast. It is such an honor, and I'm really, really grateful, and I was looking forward to this. Another thing that I'm grateful for is one, just, you know, reflecting on what just recently happened.
Yes.
I'm just grateful for the time that I do have, and I think it just makes me realize like how precious every day is, and every people who are in my family are. Yeah, and just grateful for this day, this opportunity to be sharing a little bit about my grandfather, and also a little bit about some things that God's been teaching me with you today.
Yeah, you've been, the past
Mhm.
couple of years have been flying by, Sharon. I see all the things that you have going on. Um, you moved to America the same age that I moved to Canada. So we got to go back again to Seoul, South Korea, Sharon. What do you remember most about those times?
Korea is so fun. I absolutely loved my childhood. I remember recently I've been rewatching this Korean drama. It's called Reply 1988. But
Hmm.
rewatching that actually reminds me a lot about my childhood.
Yeah.
So in that scene, it's like about Korea back in 88. But Korea now, I think, especially Seoul, looks very different.
Yeah.
But back then, even when I was still there in that small town in Seoul, it was actually very like close knit. I was, we had neighbors and everyone who cared about each other's business and stuff like that. So I remember when I was young and my parents would go to church early in the morning for like morning prayer or something like that. I
Yeah.
would always wake up and I would just start crying like crazy.
Because they were
And then
gone.
yeah, because they were gone.
Yeah.
I was a huge crybaby growing up. And then the next door neighbor was a grandma, and she would come and she would like try to make me stop crying and things like that. And I had my friends living in the neighborhood, and my mom would make something like a little side dish or something and be like, hey, bring this over to your friends. So I would just take the side dish
Yeah.
to walk over to my friends,
Yeah.
give it to them, and then they'll be like, wait, hold on, don't go yet. And then they would give me something else, and then I would carry that over for our family for dinner and things like that. But it was very warm, and so much fun. And my parents and my mom, she was an organ major and she
Mm.
taught piano. So in our house, we used to always have people come over, learn piano, and just have a lot of visitors at our small little place in
Yeah.
Seoul. Um, but yeah, that was great.
So Sharon, how did you get to America, right? Because that's the other side of the world.
Yeah.
And unless you're intentional about
Mhm.
where you're looking, what you're trying to do, you don't just pick this place of all places.
Mhm.
Like, how did that happen? Because you came with your parents, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it happened really fast. I think we moved within like a month.
Wow.
So yeah. So what happened was there was a church in California, and they needed a pastor. So they talked with my dad, and they invited him to come to America to be the head pastor of that church. But a lot of things weren't set. So my mom told me, like, don't tell anyone that you're going to America because we're not sure yet. And the day that we were sure was when we were actually moving to America.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah. That's
so
funny.
I remember it was so funny because the day that we are leaving to America, I was standing outside, and even until that day, I haven't told any of my school friends that I'm going to America. But I was outside in my neighborhood, and my friend was walking to school. And she was like, Sharon, or Kiron, which is my Korean name, is like, Kiron, why aren't you going to school? And I was like, oh, I'm going to America. And she was like, that's so funny. See you later. And then we just left. So I guess
Yeah,
she never
yeah,
saw me. But yeah, so we came to America because of my dad, so that he can pastor a church. But that's like a whole nother story. I think at that time I was so young that I didn't really understand what was like everything that was happening.
yes,
But as I was older, I kind of found out what actually happened was we came to America. And then when we came, something happened with the church or something. I'm not sure. But my dad moved his whole family over to California. And then we found out, oh, they don't have a spot for my dad.
oh,
Um, yeah. And I mean, when we were young, my parents didn't discuss that.
yeah,
So I didn't know anything. But yeah, so before I had a place and we moved, and then something happened, they didn't have it anymore. And I just remember that time. It was just hard for me not seeing my parents all the time.
yeah,
But my parents, they worked really hard. They had to provide for the family. So my dad and my mom, who's never done like hard labor ever before, she grew up kind of like a little princess of like the
yeah,
daughter of the director of the orphanage that my mom, my great grandfather
yeah,
and
yeah.
the
Hmm.
family orphanage, and everyone like took care of her very well. And she just taught piano and stuff like that. But for the first time in America, she had to do hard labor. So I remember my dad and my mom would go out early in the morning to paint houses, and they would come home really late. And like that was really hard for me when I was young, just like, oh, where's mom and
Yeah,
where are my parents? And then seeing them come home, and when I give them a hug, I could smell the paint from their breath. And so that was when I was young, I was just sad that my parents weren't home. But now looking back, it really breaks my heart because I understand, like, man, like that must have been so tough for my parents, and especially for my mom, who had to transition from being someone, pastor's wife of a pretty big sized
yeah.
church in Korea, always treated very well, to coming to America where she couldn't speak the language at all, and having to try to provide for the whole family with two young kids. But yeah, they really grateful for them.
Yeah, that is a massive shift
Yeah.
and transition in so many forms. It's like you come to one
Mm-hmm.
thing, it's supposed to do one thing, and then the other thing happens. Like when we came to Canada, like my mom worked in like the mines as a cook and a cleaner. So, but the way it worked, the hours were
Mm-hmm.
crazy, right? So you'd be gone for like 6 months, come back
Mm-hmm.
for 3 weeks, gone for 2 months. So I understand exactly what you're saying about like, man, it sucks, right? Because you want to be able to
Yeah.
enjoy certain things, but the other part of it, Sharon, that it kind of makes me think of is your parents coming over and now they're readjusting, shifting, and trying to make a life differently than the one they anticipated. And that comes with a certain amount of expectations and discipline for the kids, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not always it just happens by default. So there's expectations of, look, I'm working hard so you can be better in some form. So Sharon, when it came from like in the household, as far as expectations with school and so forth, because as an Asian American, it's a little bit different, right?
Mm-hmm.
How were you navigating through that? Now you're in this new world trying to figure out how it's going to work, and you see your parents working this hard, and they may be saying, hey, look, it's college or nothing, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
how were you navigating through all of that as you were growing up in a world you're still trying to understand?
Yeah, I think in terms of expectations, being the younger sibling,
Yeah.
I think in some forms I had it so much easier than my sister, uh, my older sister.
Yeah.
And also, given like my older sister, I always tell her, like, oh, yeah, you're the smarter one and all that stuff. So my sister, she like at a young age was very smart. So I think my parents, especially my mom, put a lot of expectations on her. And so for me, I was like a little bit more free spirited, kind
Yeah,
of like, oh, I don't want to do tutoring. No, like I don't want to do this. I just want to watch TV or like that
yeah,
kind of stuff. Because my mom was more like, okay, like Sharon, we'll just let her be. And then, but Christina, like, okay, like she's like always been that I guess child where it's like, oh, she was always smart and all that stuff. So for me, I think more than feeling like, oh, I had an expectation that I needed to meet, a lot of it was more of like me wanting to, I guess, do the best that I can do.
yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's kind of how I perceived it. So, like I'm here and I want to just do my best here, or I want to try to improve this. So I think in many ways, I didn't feel a lot of pressure coming from my parents. I think a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
pressure was more kind of on my own, like watching my parents and seeing them work hard just felt like, okay, like I want to do well. I want to do well to help provide for the family. I want to make my parents proud. And yeah, and I want to show it and see like what I can do if I really put 100% of my efforts into things.
And Trey, I think it's important, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you talked about, you seeing your sister and lots of the pressure came on them, but you also saw
Mm-hmm.
it from a different angle. And so you wanted to be better as best as you could be for yourself. But
Mm-hmm.
we as people put so much pressure on ourselves in different seasons of our lives. What were some of those pressures that you were putting on yourself, but also not just mentally, but
Mm-hmm.
you physically did some things that got you to a certain position, especially university wise? You went to a big university, but what were some of those pressures were you putting on yourself? Was it in school? Was it when you got home, things you had to do? What
Mm-hmm.
pressures were you putting on yourself? Because we do it every day without even really
Yeah.
thinking about it.
Yeah, definitely in school, the pressure was I have to get straight A's.
Mm,
That was kind of the thing. And my way of thinking was like, well, if someone can get straight A's, why not me?
mm,
So I just always thought, okay, like if I can do this, then let me do it. And also just kind of thinking about how I don't want to live with regret. I said, you know what? Like I want to study until I know I did my full best and studied every material that I can and memorize everything that
yeah,
is actually available for me and put my 100% effort into it. So at least I know that I gave it my best. And then if I still don't get the mark or the grades that I want, then like I at least know I try my best. So that was kind of the pressure that I put on me. And also I think on a deeper level, it was more kind of I wanted to prove myself to me and prove myself that, hey, like I can do this. Because in many ways, I guess if you look at my academic history, you could say, yeah, I did very well in school, was part of all the honors AP classes and things like that. But I always felt like I was the dumbest in the whole class. Like, I always felt like, oh, I don't belong here type of sense of like, wow, like everyone understands what the teacher is saying.
yeah,
I have no idea. It's not registering for me. And I kind of understood like, oh, okay, like this person takes like an hour to do his homework. But for me, it takes me 3 hours. So I just felt like, oh, okay, like some things, yeah, I take my time. Some things come a little bit slower to me, but that's why I'm gonna put in that extra effort,
mm,
and that's why I'm gonna work even harder to say like, hey, I can do this too. So that was a lot of pressure, just that. And then even in sports, I did competitive cheerleading. So with that, actually the expectation and the pressure came mostly in sports, I think, especially from my coach who was very successful at what he does. Previous to coaching our team, he was like the team that he coached was
mm-hmm.
state champion for like
Wow.
the past decade. And so there was a lot of pressure on us to be the state champion and to win all the
Yeah.
competitions and stuff like that. So I worked really hard for that too. And yeah, and in that, my last year we won third place in state, and I was kind of bummed because the next year after I graduated, they won state champ. I was like, darn it, I missed my year. But yeah, but in that ways, I think I put a lot of pressure on me to just be the top in whatever I do. In the sense of like, hey, like if someone can do it, why not you?
Yeah. Yeah. You know, you said a whole bunch there, Sharon, and you're absolutely right. If someone can do it, why not you? I want to jump forward a bit to kind of where our paths cross, Sharon, because there are certain stories that you hear people share, and it's just like, yo, that's out of a movie. That doesn't even make sense. And when we started getting to know each other a little bit, and you were telling me a little bit about you, I was just like, wait a minute, Sharon, like that's kind of like something you see in the movie, right? So you overachieved throughout your time in school, go to college, you do all the things that you know you could possibly do. Yeah, you may have to put a little extra hour working with everybody else, but you still did it, graduated, and you were working at one of the top account executives in LA. But Sharon, if I remember the date correctly, I think you told me it was January 4th, 2019. I think that's what you told me. I'm hoping it's the right off the top of my memory, where you had kind of a bit of like a crisis, right? Where you realized that something was not right and things shifted for you abruptly. So like it's on paper, you have all of the things for people to say, man, look, she's smooth sailing, it's money, she's good. But something in your spirit, something in your heart didn't feel right. Sharon, walk us through how you got there.
Yeah. So actually a lot of like the brewing and that kind of started a while back, I think. And then I think January 4th was kind of officially when I launched my e-commerce store.
Yes.
But yeah, so just kind of going back to everything that happened. So I graduated college and I got a job in one of the biggest media companies in America. And I was promoted into account executive, and I was working as one of the youngest account executives in our office, in the LA office. And on paper, I guess you could say like, oh yeah, I did everything like right, quote unquote, you know, like get good grades in school, graduate from a good college with an expensive degree, get a good job in the city, and you know, just like check. Okay, I did that. But I think like I just knew when I was working, just like, oh, there's so much more inside of me that I just felt kind of frustrated where I was at. I felt like, oh, okay, like I did everything. I did everything that I thought I was supposed to do to be quote unquote successful. I worked hard and did everything that I thought I was, you know, things that were expected of me.
Yes.
But I'm not happy. And when I look at the future of where this path that I'm on will lead me, like that is scary. Like I don't, where I'm at, I can't imagine like 10 years, 20 years down this path that I was on. And at that time, you know, I was just graduated, like 20, that's my early 20s. So 22, 23, 24. And I was just starting my career, but I just felt like, wow, I feel like I don't even know who I am.
Wow. Yeah.
Like all my life, I was just doing things in many ways to meet society expectations or, you know, like parents' expectations of what it means to be a good daughter. And I just felt like all this life, like I'm just doing things because I thought I was supposed to be doing it. But I came to a point where I'm like, I don't even know what I like. Like, I don't even know what I like. I don't even know what I'm passionate about, what I'm about, what I stand for, what I believe in. And like, I don't even know who I am anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so in that time, you could say I, hit my quarter life crisis of like, what the heck am I doing with my life?
Yeah.
Um, and I started to really like seek out answers for that of like, I don't like where I'm at, but I have no idea where I want to be. So I feel stuck.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like this, but I don't even know where to step forward into. So I can't even move forward. And I'm miserable where I'm at. And I just feel lost.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of where I was at. And there's a lot of different things that happened in that season of me kind of wrestling with this, with my identity, wrestling with my future, wrestling with what I need to be doing with my life. One of the things was I started working with a career coach. And he started asking me all these questions of like, hey, like, what are, your top strengths? And what are some of your lifestyle goals you have? What kind of lifestyle do you want to have? Like, what matters to you? What are some, 5 potential career paths that interest you? And just really being able to put things down on paper.
Yeah.
And be able to have all the things that's like in my head, like in an organized manner, really helped out a lot. And I started talking with a friend of mine who was in digital marketing, and he had started his own digital marketing agency. He was an entrepreneur, started multiple different businesses. And one thing that I realized in kind of the process of working with my career coach is that I have an entrepreneurial spirit, and entrepreneurship has always been something that's been fascinating for me. So I was like, oh, okay, like this is interesting. And digital marketing was something also that was interesting.
Yeah.
So that's why I started talking with him, and we started hopping on, weekly coaching calls in some way. And he would teach me, hey, you should listen to this podcast. You should read this book. And hey, look into this. And I started that journey. And during that journey, that's actually how I came across you and the content that you were putting out, because the guy who was mentoring me was like, oh, you should download Pep Talk.
Yeah.
And I listened to this like every morning. And then so I downloaded it, and I came across some of the audios that you put up. And I was like, man, I love this. Like, talking about identity, about knowing yourself. And I used to just listen to your audio like on repeat, on commute, or when I'm feeling discouraged while working at, in my office. I would listen to your audio. And then during that time, just kind of started that journey of figuring out who I am and that personal growth journey. And that year I started working with someone who was doing e-commerce, and learning from him how to start your own e-commerce business. And then I started my first e-commerce business. I launched it, I think, January 4th, or I was working on it before as well, but officially launched it January 4th, because I just said I wanted to say I launched my first business when I was 24, which honestly really means nothing. But
Sharon, it's one thing to see these changes that's going on within you, right? And you're feeling good working with a coach and they're helping you, but it's another thing to act on that and take a leap of faith, Sharon. It's not an easy step, right? And that is often the step that stops a lot of people because they don't want to fall on their face, but that's not faith, right? So I want to ask Sharon, from a leap of faith standpoint, you're leaving certain comfort, certain stability. How did your faith help you take that leap?
Oh, it's everything. I don't think I can be doing what I'm doing if I didn't have faith.
Yeah.
I think growing up as like a PK pastor's kid, I always knew about God, but it was really in college when I started to understand who Jesus is and what that means to me. And I was so passionate about the gospel and just the reality of like, man, like this is good news and the reality that I get to live in because of Christ. But then I guess at that time, it came to a point of frustration of like, oh, I say I believe, I say I'm a believer, I know who God is, but felt like there was a disconnect between what I know about who God is and what I know about who I am because of who God is versus the amount of action that I'm taking.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, man, if I actually know and believe that God is God, that he has a good plan and purpose over my life, that he has plans to prosper me, not to harm me, plans for a future and not for harm. Like all these different things that he will instruct me and guide me, that his grace is sufficient enough for me, for his power is made perfect in my weakness. If I know that, and I know that like who I am in Christ is loved, is and that he's guiding me every step of the way, then like why am I living a life that is so safe? And I think the idea of like having faith is like you have to there faith in some ways it's like the same thing as risk. And when there is risk, it gives you an opportunity to have faith. When you're living life so safe, there is no opportunity for you to have faith because it's like, why do you need faith when everything is so safe? So, so I think
that was the thing that kind of gave you that little push.
yes, because I was like, man, I'm so sick and tired of saying I believe in Jesus, but not acting like I actually do. And I'm so sick and tired of believing and saying that I'm a believer, but not acting like a believer. So in that time, I was like, okay, it's time for me to actually put what I know about God and what I know about who I am and actually walk in faith. And so I remember when I was launching my first e-commerce store, I was like, okay, God, like I have no idea what I'm doing, but I feel like you're calling me out of the boat. I have no idea like how to swim, but I'm going to step out in faith and trust that you will either supernaturally give me the ability to walk on water or when I fall that you will be there to lift me up.
Wow, Sharon, that's a powerful statement for the person who look, they have an idea of a different vision, right? Like they see it, they can touch it, but they just can't really get over that mental block of like, man, is it going to be worth it? What's an advice that you would give, Sharon, for someone who was where you were, right? Wanting to take that leap of faith, but maybe they don't have that push. What is something that you would say to maybe encourage them to take that step?
Actually, this might not be something that you've heard before. But I would want to encourage that person to first sit still. Like before just taking that step out and like doing it scared. Because, you know, a lot of people say like feel the fear and do it anyways. Part of that is true. But also like I would just say like sit still and be still before God. Like before you do anything, I think it's very important for you to understand, like you have to sit still and know that God is God. And like when you understand that, that will give you the courage to step forward.
You know, it's so good, Sharon. You know, the thing is, tell people all the time is like, man, when you take a leap of faith, you might fall. It's a guarantee. There's no way you're going to be able to stand every season that comes your way. But it's like you will know that when you do fall, that you can get up. And sometimes it's not on your own strength. Sometimes you need the strength of those around you, but you need that internal strength, right? Where if God is going to say, work with faith, right? Step out on faith, faith bigger than fears, you have to work your faith, but you have to know if he is with me, then there's a good chance that I got to trust that he's going to help me. And that's what he's going to do. It doesn't make it easier because nowhere in the Bible does it say you're not going to struggle. You're going to struggle. Jesus struggled. we are going to struggle. But it is that step, Sharon, that got you to where you are today. And a big part of it, how we met at the beginning, was when you first started Millennial Life School podcast, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which you've been doing a great job. I listened to your recent podcast with John Doan, I think his name is.
Uh-huh.
Great story as well, too. I still got to finish it. But that seed was planted when you took that leap of faith, when you went to Bali, right?
Mm-hmm.
You figured out kind of where your passion and alignment was. What do you remember about that time in Bali, Sharon? What was that specific seed that you said, man, I really want to help the youth. I may not know how, but maybe let me try this.
Yeah. I think a lot of it was in Bali. I had to really reflect on what I want to spend my time doing
Mm,
and what is meaningful for me. And and before that time, I remember I did this like long questionnaire. It's called like the Ultimate Questionnaire by uh, David Bet. I forgot it.
oh, David.
David Bet Patrick. Or, there's
Oh,
like three different
David, Patrick, David, I think. Something like that. I know who you're talking
something
about.
like that. Yeah, yeah. I'm like I always forget his name because I'm like there's three things to remember, but there's something David, there's something Pet, there's
Yeah, yeah,
something
yeah.
yeah. But anyways, he had this thing like the Ultimate Questionnaire. And I remember taking that, I think back in 2018 or something like that. And at the end of the questionnaire, it boils down to three questions, which is what do you love? What bothers you? And what do you hate?
Mm,
And in that time, basically, he's talking about how when you are able to do something that touches on these three emotions, like that's when you're gonna, like, that's like your sweet spot of whatever you do. And I remember I was just reflecting on those things. And at that time, I had that like inside of me, but I wasn't even thinking about it. But now, when I look back, I realize, wow, everything that I do plays on these three questions.
mm,
And some things that were coming up to me is one, like, what do I love? Is I love, people who share inspiring content and who are creative and who are doing things like this. And so like storytelling, inspiring others, all that stuff. I'm like, man, I love that.
yeah.
And what bothers me, I wrote, it bothers me that there's people who make people believe that they can't dream big.
Mm,
There's people who just discourage people like, oh, you can't do that. Oh, you won't be able to do that. Like I remember when I was younger, my sister, she said, this was really hurtful for her because when she was in middle school, she wrote as one of her goals to go to Harvard. And her teacher told her, oh, you can't go to Harvard.
mm,
Like, I'm just like, what? Like that bothers me. That makes me really mad.
yeah.
Like, that's not right. And then I wrote in terms of what I love, like what I love, what bothers me, and then what bothers me, what I hate. And yeah, so in terms of what I hate, I wrote like, oh, I hate that there's people like young people who are so depressed.
Mm,
There's young people who don't know like what they want to do with their life, and young people who are just like looking for inspiration but are just feeling so empty inside.
mm,
And I remember I wrote those things down and I was like, okay, like there's got to be something that I can do. And I noticed that there's this problem of like young people who just are so confused, hopeless, and like they don't know what they want to do.
yeah.
And much of it, like I also felt too when I hit my quarter life crisis of
Yeah.
like, man, I don't even know what I want to do.
Yeah. It was your story. Yeah.
Yeah. So I really felt that pain. And I said, hey, I want to be someone who actually not just recognizes problems and pain in this world, but I want to be someone who is actually brave enough to do something about the things that break my heart. So, yeah, and so I learned about coaching through a friend who was just like, "Hey, Sharon, I think you'd be really great at this." And I looked into it, and at that time I was still doing like the e-commerce stuff, but when I discovered life coaching, it just felt like, man, like this is something that I can do because I am me. This is something that I can do because God has uniquely designed me with certain desires and talents and strength. Most recently, I finished a certification program for like coaching startup founders.
Yeah.
So transition into doing a lot of work with startup founders all around the world, which has been so fun, and had different opportunities to work with colleges, to do workshops on identity and leadership in college settings. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's been a wild journey that I could have never kind of planned, exactly the way everything turned out. But I always say just one step at a time, just one day at a time. Like
Yeah.
wake up and seek out, okay, God, what do you want me to do today? And just do that one thing. Yeah.
I think one of the things, Sharon, what makes people want to work with you too is because you're very genuine and honest about where you are and how we can make this thing work for all of us, right? Because your heart's in the right place. And you could have stood back in corporate, right? So for those listening, right, like don't get twisted. Like Sharon was a big deal where she was, right? We were generating millions of dollars, right? But to be able to be in a position where everything seemed right and to take a leap of faith in doing something that makes the world move forward, not saying what you did and wasn't doing it, but it wasn't
Mhm.
touching hearts in a say. And I think that's when a person moves from just going through the motions, so to speak, but moving in, going in purpose. And when you found, you're very good at answering questions, Sharon, as you just gave us three big ones. So in this season, Sharon, what question are you trying to answer of you?
Hmm. Um, what question am I trying to answer of me? That's an interesting question. Um,
It's
well,
let me give some more context, Sharon, as you
yeah.
as you're thinking. I think every season, while it may look similar, it's a different one, right? Sometimes we're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we maneuver through loss, or how do we build, or how do we grow through this, or how do we get more spiritually inclined? And I think we're always asking ourselves questions. When we sit and we be still, usually that's when the questions speak the loudest. It's not always a business question. Sometimes it's an eternal one. Uh, but we're always asking the questions, but we don't know how to answer them because we often don't know how to be intact with that. You talk about being still earlier. That's a very important skill. So, with that being it, Sharon, is there a question in this season that you're like, man, I don't know the answer to this yet, but I'm looking to find it?
Yeah. I think one thing is, I'm always asking this, okay, what now? What next?
Yeah.
Right. I feel like I'm in a very interesting place right now where I feel like I've pretty much done everything that I wanted to do in
Yeah.
terms of what I wanted to start or finish. So a lot of like the goals that I had for myself, I already did it. So now I'm asking in terms of my career, like what's next? I think, well, I actually have the answer for myself. But now the question is, okay, God, what door will you open for me?
Mhm.
Because there's certain things that I want of like, oh yeah, okay, I know this is what I want. Right. And then now the next part is like, okay, God, like, wh- which door will you bless and which one will you open? So there's a lot kind of on my mind right now as well, because I have a very unique background in digital marketing,
Yeah.
doing e-commerce. And then during the pandemic, I started like a digital marketing agency. So I have a unique background in digital marketing and sales, and also with life coaching and executive coaching for startups. So now I'm just kind of bringing that and be like, okay, God, like, what's my next step? Uh, what makes the most sense for you? And also, like, what what do you want to do? So,
Yeah. Yeah. Sharon.
Mhm.
Before we close out, a lot of my audience always hears from me, but this season we
Mhm.
do it a little bit differently where we let the guests close out the show. But I want to add some more context to it
Mhm.
for you, Sharon, because now you're working with startups and you're an executive coach and you're doing some life coaching as well too. But at the heart of it, it started with a passion and a little bit of purpose to find out like I want to help people. I want to be able to do more, right?
Mhm.
So in the message on your heart today, I would love for you to add, how does someone find what that passion, how do they operate and move into that and finding that gift to work with it? Because a lot of people struggle with those things because people always say, I used to hear it a lot too when I started speaking, Akeem, you can't make any money speaking. But the thing is, I wasn't operating it from the money standpoint, right? But these are all things that you hear in
Mm.
the external world, and they try and talk down about the ideas and the dreams, and you don't give it oxygen to breathe. So, how does someone get from passion into movement and not just allow it to be a thought?
Mm. Um, I would say ask yourself this question of what's the next step you can take towards becoming the person that you want to become. And it's not just about like achieving certain goals, right? It's not about like, oh, okay, like I want to achieve XYZ. But in the end of the day, I think success is when you like who you are becoming.
Mm,
And it's about the person, it's about the character that you're building, it's about the inner being, and everything else will come, right? Money will follow and opportunities will follow, but take action towards the person you want to be
mm,
and think about the character you want to cultivate. So if it's like, I want to be someone who is brave, I want to be someone who is strong and courageous, then take that next step where you feel like, oh, okay, like I think this would help me to become someone who's more bold, or
mm,
this would be my next step of action towards being someone and stepping into that someone who is bold and courageous. And yeah, and just like if you want to be someone who is loving, then just take that next step of what feels loving to you. And it doesn't have to be like, oh, I have to like serve millions of people, so I gotta start a podcast that with
yeah,
like millions of listeners or something like that. No, just be that one loving voice, right?
mm,
And I think
yeah,
something that I've learned from all the years of, doing this is I think when I started off, in my earlier 20s, a lot of it was like, oh, I want to like achieve this. And like I chase after those like fancy, shiny stuff, status, money, etc. But now I think my goal has become much more simpler, which is just I want to be a friend and a sister to someone who needs a sister and a friend.
oh wow,
And that has simplified so much. And then even when I did coaching stuff before, I used to always ask like, oh, how was I? Like, oh, was I a good coach? Or am I like getting the results that I want or all these different things? And and that actually caused a lot of anxiety, and also it made me feel super stressed. And then after each coaching session, I would judge myself of like, was that good or whatever. But now I stopped doing that, and something that God has been teaching me is like, Sharon, you can just be.
mm,
And Bob Goff says this. He says, the goal of love isn't efficiency. Love's goal isn't efficiency, but it's presence. And if my goal is to love people well, then my goal should be presence, which is just to be. And then now, after each coaching calls or whatever, I just ask myself these three questions that are grounded in like values that I want to have, which is, was I caring? Was I loving? And was I bold? And if I was that,
Yeah.
then that's good enough.
Wow, that's powerful, Sharon. Bold, loving. Two things you said. You said whenever I hear the word bold and courage, all in the same stratosphere, I'm like, man, that is a reminder and encouragement for us all. Because without those two things, nothing gets done. Sharon, what is the best way for people to keep in touch with you or would like to work with you? Listen to the podcast. Obviously, we'll put everything in the show notes below. But what is the best way for people to reach out to you and get in contact?
On Instagram, my personal page is at Sharon Kilon Han. And then after 2 years of the podcast, I just recently, for the first time, I started a separate Instagram for my podcast, which is at Millennial Life School. I was very, very hesitant to start another Instagram page because I'm like, man, I can barely manage one. Yeah. But then I just thought it'd be nice to just separate those two. So you can follow my podcast and some of my coaching stuff at Millennial Life School. It is a brand new Instagram page. And also all my coaching stuff is on my website at www.sharonkilonhan.com. And yeah, you can find all the good stuff there.
And Sharon's got a lot of good things there, and her podcast content is definitely visually pleasing, and lots of good content and conversation as well too. Sharon, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. That's one thing I always appreciate you, Sharon, is your genuine heart, and I think people can feel that and tell that. And our relationship, you've always, I'm like, whatever I feel like you do is because you've really thought about it and it's really on your heart. And that is an encouragement to see for all of us because as human beings, man, if we function more using our heart and letting that lead us, obviously it does get us in trouble sometimes. But when we remember at the core of everything, the Bible talks about love, right? And I think that's something that when we see your work, we see the love in it. So, Sharon, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And we'll definitely be in touch.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy and grateful to be here talking with you and to be on the podcast. It's such an honor.
All right, Sharon. We'll talk, Sharon. See ya.
Thank you.